Wealthy killer thought he committed perfect murder. Then a 4-year-old spoke up. He had it all planned out. The perfect crime by the perfect suspect. Someone so wealthy and respected that no one would ever believe he was capable of murder. Marcus Whitmore had covered his tracks, hired the best lawyers money could buy, and was confident that even if charged, he'd walk free. His only mistake? Underestimating a 4-year-old girl who had seen everything from her hiding place in the closet. When Lily Chen finally found her voice, her innocent words would begin unraveling a web of violence that stretched back years. But the real breakthrough came when Zeus, a German shepherd with legendary investigative skills, picked up a scent that would lead to the most shocking discovery in the case. What this remarkable police dog found buried in the killer's own garden would expose not just one murder, but a pattern of predatory behavior that had terrorized women across multiple states. The gentle melody of "You Are My Sunshine" drifted through the warm kitchen as Dr. Sarah Chen stirred her famous marinara sauce, the rich aroma of garlic and fresh basil filling every corner of their cozy home. At the small oak table that had been her grandmother's, 4-year-old Lily Chen was completely absorbed in her latest masterpiece, a crayon drawing of their family that would soon join the colorful gallery covering the refrigerator door. Each piece of artwork told a story. Purple flowers taller than houses, stick figures with enormous smiles, and always, always, a little girl holding hands with her mommy. "Mama, look." Lily held up her latest creation, a swirl of pink and yellow that vaguely resembled their golden retriever, Buttercup, who had passed away the previous winter. "It's Buttercup in heaven." Sarah's heart squeezed as she turned from the stove, her scrubs exchanged for comfortable jeans and her favorite Stanford Medical School sweatshirt. Even after a 12-hour shift, performing delicate heart surgery on premature infants, this moment, this sacred routine of dinner preparation, while her daughter created art, recharged her soul completely. "It's beautiful, baby. Buttercup would love all those happy colors." The kitchen embodied everything Sarah had fought to build after escaping the nightmare of her marriage to Lily's father. Sunlight streamed through checkered curtains she'd sewn herself, illuminating family photos that chronicled their journey. Sarah's medical school graduation with baby Lily on her hip, their first Christmas in this house, lazy Saturday mornings building blanket forts. Every surface held memories of the life they'd created together, just the two of them against the world. Of texts from Marcus Whitmore, her ex-boyfriend whose charming facade had gradually peeled away to reveal something much darker underneath. "You can't just ignore me, Sarah. We need to talk. I saw you at the hospital today. You looked tired. You need someone to take care of you. Stop being stubborn. I'm coming over." Each message grew more aggressive, more demanding. Sarah had ended their relationship 3 months ago when his controlling behavior became impossible to ignore. The way he'd drop by her workplace unexpectedly, his jealousy of her male colleagues, his insistence that Lily needed a father figure, and his barely concealed resentment when the little girl didn't immediately warm to him. She'd recognized the warning signs that had been invisible to her during her first marriage, and she'd acted swiftly. But Marcus Whitmore wasn't the type of man who accepted rejection gracefully. Sarah moved to the window, ostensibly checking the simmering sauce, but actually scanning the quiet street. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, thumb hovering over Detective Rodriguez's number. Maria had been the officer who'd helped her navigate the restraining order process, who'd listened with professional compassion to Sarah's fears about Marcus's escalating behavior. "Mama, why are you sad?" Lily's voice was small, concerned. At 4 years old, she possessed an uncanny ability to read her mother's emotions. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." Sarah forced brightness into her voice, but her eyes kept returning to the phone. Should she call the police? Marcus hadn't technically violated the restraining order. His texts, while disturbing, weren't explicitly threatening. And his wealth and connections had already made the legal process more complicated than it should have been. The doorbell rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Lily looked up from her coloring, eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Who's that, Mama?" Through the frosted glass of the front door, Sarah could make out a tall, familiar silhouette. Her chest tightened as she recognized Marcus's expensive suit, his perfectly styled hair. He'd always been meticulous about his appearance, understanding instinctively how his polished exterior could mask the darkness within. "Stay right there, baby," Sarah whispered, her mind racing through options. The locks were secure, the security system was armed. She could simply not answer, could call the police from the safety of her kitchen, but Marcus was persistent, and she knew he wouldn't simply leave. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. Against every instinct screaming in her head, Sarah walked toward the door. Perhaps if she spoke to him briefly, daughter's world, forever. Lily carefully selected her red crayon to add a sun to her picture when the loud voices started in the living room. At first, it sounded like when Mama talked to Aunt Maria on the phone, grown-up words that she didn't really understand. But then, Mama's voice changed, became scared in a way that made Lily's tummy feel funny. Uncle Marcus had brought her toys before, pretty dolls with long hair and a tea set with tiny cups that actually held water. He smiled a lot and called her Princess, but something about his smile made her want to hide behind Mama's legs. Mama had explained that Uncle Marcus wouldn't be visiting anymore, and Lily had felt relieved, though she couldn't explain why. Now his voice was different, too. Not the fake, sweet tone he used when other people were watching. It was angry and scary, like the monster voices in the movies Mama said she was too little to watch. "You can't just throw away what we had, Sarah." "Please leave, Marcus. You're scaring my daughter." "I'm scaring her? You're the one being unreasonable." Lily slipped down from her chair, her drawing forgotten. The voices were getting louder, and Mama sounded really scared now. She tiptoed toward the living room, clutching Mr. Buttons, her favorite teddy bear, who went everywhere with her. What she saw confused her 4-year-old mind. Uncle Marcus was holding Mama's arms, shaking her a little bit. Mama was crying, which made Lily's chest hurt, because Mama never cried. Even when Buttercup died, Mama had been sad, but strong. This was different. This was the kind of crying that meant something was very, very wrong. "Let go of me!" Mama's voice was different now. Not the gentle voice that read bedtime stories or sang silly songs during bath time. Uncle Marcus saw her then, his angry face changing back to that fake smile. "Hey there, Princess. Why don't you go play in your room?" But Lily couldn't move. Something shiny appeared in Uncle Marcus's hand, something that caught the light from the kitchen. Mama saw it too, and made a sound Lily had never heard before, like a hurt animal. "Please, Marcus, think about what you're doing. Lily's here." The shiny thing moved fast. Mama made another strange sound and fell down on the floor. There was red paint everywhere. On the walls, on Mama's pretty shirt, spreading across the carpet like spilled juice. "Mama," Lily whispered, but Mama didn't answer. She was lying very still, and her eyes were closed, like when she took naps on Sunday afternoons, but this was different. This nap looked wrong. Uncle Marcus was breathing hard, looking at the red paint on his hands like he was surprised to see it. Then he looked at Lily faster than they ever had before. Behind her, she could hear Uncle Marcus calling her name in that fake sweet voice. But underneath it was something that made her skin crawl. Her bedroom was dark, but she knew every inch of it. The closet, her hiding place during thunderstorms, beckoned. She scrambled inside, pulling the door almost closed, leaving just a crack so she could breathe. In the darkness, surrounded by her dresses and Mama's shoes, she held Mr. Buttons tight and tried to make herself as small as possible. "Lily? Princess? Where are you?" Uncle Marcus's voice was getting closer. She could hear him in a kitchen first, then in the hallway. "I won't hurt you, sweetheart. Uncle Marcus just wants to talk." But Lily knew that was a lie. Uncle Marcus had hurt Mama. Mama was sleeping with all that red paint, and it was Uncle Marcus's fault. His footsteps stopped right outside her bedroom door. Through the crack in the closet, she could see his shadow moving around her room. He looked under the bed, behind her toy chest, in the corner where her dollhouse sat. Then he stood right in front of the closet door. Lily held her breath until her lungs burned. Mr. Buttons was pressed so tight against her chest that she could feel his button eyes against her cheek. She could hear Uncle Marcus breathing on the other side of the thin wooden door. Heavy, angry breathing that sounded like the monster under the bed. The door handle turned slightly. "Please, please, please," Lily prayed silently, squeezing her eyes shut. "Please make him go away. Please let Mama wake up from her nap." After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away. She heard Uncle Marcus in other parts of the house, opening doors, calling her name with increasing frustration. Then finally, she heard the front door slam. But Lily didn't move. She stayed in the dark closet, whispering to Mr. Buttons, "We have to be very, very quiet. Mama said if there's ever trouble, we hide and stay quiet until help comes." Hours passed. Lily fell asleep, curled around her teddy bear, dreaming of red paint and scary voices, not knowing that her mother would never wake up from her nap, and that her own life had changed forever. Mrs. Patterson had always been an early riser, but at 73, her sleep had become fragmented and restless. At 6:30 a.m., she was already watering her prize-winning roses when she noticed Dr. Chen's car still in the driveway. Unusual for someone who typically left for the hospital before dawn. Even more concerning was the faint sound of crying voice, hoarse and desperate. Mrs. Patterson dropped her watering can and hurried to the Chen house, her arthritic joints protesting. The front door stood slightly ajar, a detail that sent ice through her veins. Sarah Chen was meticulous about security, especially after the restraining order. "Sarah, Lily," she called out, pushing the door open wider. The scene that greeted her would haunt her remaining years. The living room looked like a battleground. Furniture overturned, family photos shattered on the floor, and blood. So much blood that Mrs. Patterson's mind initially refused to process what she was seeing. Dr. Sarah Chen lay motionless in the center of the chaos, her body positioned in a way that spoke of violence and struggle. Her beautiful face, usually animated with intelligence and warmth, was peaceful now in death, but the scene around her told a story of terror and desperation. "Oh, dear God," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her trembling hands reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, Lily's cries grew louder, more desperate. Officer Timothy Jenkins arrived within 4 minutes of Mrs. Patterson's frantic 911 call, his cruiser's sirens wailing through the quiet suburban morning. A 15-year veteran, he'd seen his share of domestic violence scenes, but nothing had prepared him for this level of brutality in such a peaceful neighborhood. The child's cries led him to a small bedroom decorated with princesses and rainbows. Following the sound, he found the source, a small closet, where 4-year-old Lily Chen sat catatonic, her arms wrapped around a teddy bear, her pink pajamas stained with dried blood. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jenkins said softly, his voice taking on the gentle tone he used with his own daughters. "You're safe now. I'm here to help." But Lily didn't respond. Her dark eyes stared straight ahead, seeing something beyond the present moment. Her small body shook with silent trauma, and Jenkins realized he was looking at a child whose world had been completely shattered. Within minutes, the quiet street transformed into organized chaos. Paramedics arrived to examine Lily, finding no physical injuries, but obvious signs of severe psychological trauma. Crime scene technicians began the methodical process of documenting the horror, while neighbors gathered in small groups, their faces reflecting disbelief that such violence could invade their safe suburban sanctuary. Detective Maria Rodriguez arrived at 7:15 a.m., her experienced eyes immediately cataloging the scene's brutality. A specialist in domestic violence cases, she'd seen too many situations where restraining orders had failed to protect victims from determined predators. But the presence of a child witness added layers of complexity that would challenge every aspect of the investigation. Rodriguez knelt beside the small girl, still huddled in the closet, her heart breaking at the sight. Lily's silence spoke volumes. This wasn't just shock, but the deep withdrawal of a mind protecting itself from unbearable trauma. "Hi, Lily," Rodriguez said softly. "My name is Maria. I'm a police officer, and I'm going to make sure you're safe now." For just a moment, Lily's eyes focused on Rodriguez's face. In that brief connection, the detective saw intelligence, terror, and something else, a witness who had seen everything. As paramedics carefully lifted Lily from the closet, Rodriguez made a silent vow that would drive her through the difficult months ahead. This little girl would get justice for her mother. This monster who had destroyed a family would pay for his crimes. She had no idea that the legal battle ahead would test every principle of the justice system, or that a 4-year-old's testimony would become the key to exposing a serial killer who had hidden behind wealth and respectability for years. Standing in that blood-soaked living room, watching paramedics tend to a traumatized child, Detective Rodriguez began the hunt for Marcus Whitmore, not knowing that the most important evidence would eventually be found by her 4-legged partner, buried in the killer's own backyard. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a scene that would change multiple lives forever, and set in motion a legal precedent that would protect countless other children in years to come. Detective Maria Rodriguez had seen enough shattered lives to fill several lifetimes. In her 15 years with the Metropolitan Police Department, she specialized in the cases that haunted other officers' dreams. Domestic violence situations where love had twisted into something deadly. Her colleagues often wondered how she maintained her sanity in a world where restraining orders became death sentences, and promises of protection rang hollow in courtrooms across the city. The answer walked beside her on four legs, panting slightly in the morning heat as they approached the Chen crime scene for the third time in 2 days. Zeus, her German shepherd partner, possessed an extraordinary gift that had solved cases others had given up on. His 98% success rate in evidence detection wasn't just a statistic. It represented families who'd found closure, killers who'd faced justice, and victims whose voices had been heard even in death. Rodriguez had rescued Zeus from a military training program where his intensity had been deemed excessive. What the military saw as a flaw, she recognized as dedication. The bond between them transcended the typical human-animal partnership. They communicated through subtle cues, shared instincts, and mutual trust that had been forged through countless crime scenes and dangerous situations. "What do you think, boy?" Rodriguez murmured, as Zeus methodically testimony about Marcus Whitmore's behavior in recent months. She'd witnessed him sitting in his expensive Mercedes outside Sarah's house for hours, watching the windows with the patience of a predator. She'd seen him follow Sarah's car when she left for work, maintaining a careful distance, but never losing sight of his target. Dr. Chen was terrified of him, Mrs. Patterson had confided, her weathered hands shaking as she poured tea with nervous precision. She confided in me about his threats, his demands that she give him another chance. He couldn't accept that she was strong enough to leave him. The story that emerged through interviews painted Marcus Whitmore as a master manipulator who'd initially charmed Sarah with his wealth and apparent sophistication. He'd swept into her life during her residency, offering stability and luxury after the chaos of her abusive first marriage. But gradually, his true nature had emerged. The jealousy over her male colleagues, the surprise visits to her workplace, the subtle undermining of her confidence as a mother and surgeon. He had this way of making everything seem like it was for her own good. Sarah's sister, Maria Chen Santos, had tearfully explained. He'd show up at Lily's preschool, claiming he was there to help. He'd criticize Sarah's parenting decisions, then offer to fix the problems he'd identified. Sarah finally realized he was trying to break down her independence systematically. The restraining order Sarah had obtained 3 months before her death detailed a pattern of escalating control and intimidation. Whitmore had used his considerable resources to make her life difficult, calling in complaints about her medical practice, hiring private investigators to document her daily routines, even attempting to have Child Protective Services investigate her parenting. Each action was carefully calculated to fall just within legal boundaries while maximizing psychological pressure. Rodriguez's investigation revealed the full extent of Whitmore's wealth and connections. His real estate empire spanned 3 states, with properties valued in the hundreds of millions. His political donations had bought him access to judges, prosecutors, and city officials. His membership in exclusive country clubs and charitable boards had created a network of influential friends who viewed him as a pillar of the community. The initial searches of Whitmore's properties had been exercises in frustration. His primary residence, a sprawling mansion in the city's most prestigious neighborhood, had been meticulously cleaned. Professional cleaning services had been called the morning after Sarah's murder, ostensibly for routine maintenance. His offices, vacation homes, and rental properties had yielded nothing but expensive furnishings and carefully curated spaces that reflected his public image. "He's too smart to leave obvious evidence," Rodriguez muttered, watching Zeus work with methodical precision through yet another fruitless search. But everyone makes mistakes, even sociopaths. The forensic evidence from the crime scene was limited without the murder weapon. Blood spatter analysis confirmed the brutal nature of the attack, but without the knife, the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The timeline established through phone records and security cameras placed Whitmore in Sarah's neighborhood during the estimated time of death, but his expensive legal team would undoubtedly challenge every detail. Zeus suddenly stopped near a drainage grate 2 blocks from Sarah's house, his body tensing with the focused intensity that indicated a significant scent detection. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. This was the behavior that had led to breakthroughs in dozens of previous cases. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" But after 20 minutes of careful searching, they found nothing. The trail led nowhere, leaving Rodriguez with the familiar frustration of being close to something important, but unable to grasp it. Without the murder weapon, the case against Whitmore would be built on witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, and the courage of a traumatized 4-year-old girl. As the sun set over the quiet suburban street where Sarah Chen had died, Rodriguez made a silent promise to the memory of a dedicated surgeon and loving mother. She would find the evidence needed to convict Marcus Whitmore, no matter how long it took, or how powerful his connections proved to be. She had no way of knowing that the breakthrough would come from Zeus's extraordinary abilities, or that the evidence they sought was buried in the last place anyone would think to look, hidden beneath the killer's own carefully manicured rose garden. The 42nd floor of the Whitmore Tower commanded a breathtaking view of the city's financial district, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of corporate power. Marcus Whitmore sat at the head of a gleaming conference table, his perfectly tailored suit and confident demeanor projecting the image of a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment. Around him, his board of directors hung on his every word as he outlined plans for a luxury development that would reshape the city's skyline. "Gentlemen, this isn't just about profit margins," Whitmore said, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had built his real estate empire. "This is about legacy, about creating something that will stand as a testament to vision and excellence long after we're gone." His assistant Margaret slipped quietly into the room and placed a note beside his water glass. Whitmore's eyes flickered to the message, "Police inquiry regarding Dr. Sarah Chen," and for just a moment, his composed facade cracked. The board members, absorbed in architectural renderings and financial projections, missed the flash of cold calculation. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I need to take care of an urgent matter," Whitmore said, his recovery so smooth that none of the board members questioned the sudden adjournment. "Margaret will provide you with the detailed financial projections. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning." In his private office, Whitmore closed the door and immediately reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd memorized years ago, but hoped never to use. Victoria Kane, criminal defense attorney to the wealthy and corrupt, answered on the first ring. "Marcus?" Kane's voice was crisp, professional. "I've been expecting your call. The police have been asking questions about your relationship with Dr. Chen." "Handle it," Whitmore said curtly. "This is a misunderstanding that needs to be resolved quickly and quietly." As he ended the call, Whitmore moved to his office's private bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch despite the early hour. The alcohol burned away the last traces of his public persona, revealing the predator that lurked beneath the designer suits and charitable donations. His mind drifted to Sarah Chen, and the rage that had consumed him when she'd dared to reject his advances. She'd been perfect, beautiful, successful, vulnerable enough after her divorce to appreciate his protection and resources. He'd invested months in carefully crafting their relationship, positioning himself as her savior and Lily's potential father figure. But Sarah had proven more resilient than his previous conquests. Where other women had eventually surrendered to his control, she'd grown stronger and more independent. The final insult had come when she'd obtained that restraining order, publicly branding him as dangerous and abusive. The humiliation had been unbearable. Whitmore's memory wandered to Jessica Martinez, a young attorney who'd worked at his firm 3 years ago. She'd made the same mistake as Sarah, thinking she could simply walk away from him. The official story was that Jessica had relocated to take a position with a firm in another state, but Whitmore knew better. She'd never made it to her new job, and the missing person case had been quietly closed when no evidence of foul play was discovered. Then there was Amanda Foster, the art gallery owner who'd caught his attention 2 years ago. Their relationship had followed the familiar pattern: initial charm, growing control, and eventual resistance. Amanda's disappearance had been even cleaner than Jessica's, a hiking accident in the mountains, they'd said. Her body was never recovered, but everyone agreed it was a tragedy that could happen to anyone who ventured alone into such dangerous terrain. And Rachel Williams, the young journalist who'd made the fatal error of investigating his business practices while they were dating. Her car accident on a rainy night had been thoroughly investigated. Talented young women died tragically in preventable accidents. Sarah should have been smarter. She should have understood that Marcus Whitmore wasn't the type of man who accepted rejection gracefully. He'd given her multiple opportunities to reconsider, sent countless messages explaining why they belonged together, even tried to demonstrate his devotion by showing up at her workplace and Lily's school. But she'd been stubborn, ungrateful for everything he'd offered. The restraining order had been the final straw, a public humiliation that demanded an equally public response. If she wouldn't accept his love willingly, she'd learn that defying Marcus Whitmore came with consequences. The memory of that night still provided a satisfying warmth in his chest. Sarah's shock when she'd opened the door, her futile attempts to reason with him, the moment of recognition when she'd realized that her careful precautions had been inadequate. The knife had felt natural in his hand, an extension of his will and authority. The only complication had been the child. Lily had witnessed more than he'd intended, her wide eyes taking in details that could prove problematic. He'd searched the house thoroughly, calling her name with false sweetness while planning how to handle the situation. But the little girl had hidden well, and eventually he'd decided that a traumatized 4-year-old would make an unreliable witness at best. His confidence had proven justified over the years. Wealth and influence created their own gravity, bending the legal system to accommodate men of vision and importance. Politicians courted his donations. Judges attended his charity galas, and prosecutors understood that attacking prominent citizens required overwhelming evidence and careful consideration. The knock on his office door interrupted his reminiscence. Margaret entered with obvious reluctance, her professional composure barely masking her nervousness. "Mr. Whitmore, there are police officers here to see you. They have a warrant." The shock hit him like a physical blow. In all his years of careful manipulation and calculated risks, no one had ever dared to challenge him so directly. The very idea that common police officers would dare enter his private sanctuary with legal papers seemed impossible, absurd. But as Detective Rodriguez entered his office with her warrant and handcuffs, Marcus Whitmore realized that his wealth and connections might not be enough to protect him from a determined investigator and a traumatized child whose memory held the key to his destruction. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Whitmore felt genuine fear. Victoria Kane's corner office in the city's most prestigious law firm resembled a war room more than a traditional attorney's workspace. Legal briefs covered every surface. Multiple computer screens displayed case law and precedent research. And a team of junior associates worked with the focused intensity of soldiers preparing for battle.
Kane herself stood at the center of it all,
A sharp-featured woman in her early 50s whose reputation for destroying prosecution witnesses had made her the defense attorney of choice for wealthy clients facing serious charges. "Listen carefully," Kane addressed her assembled team, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never lost a high-profile murder case. "This isn't just about defending Marcus Whitmore. This is about establishing legal precedent that will protect our future clients from prosecutorial overreach. The state is asking a jury to convict a respected businessman based on the testimony of a traumatized 4-year-old and the supposed discoveries of a police dog. We're going to demonstrate why that's not just wrong, it's dangerous." Her lead associate, James Morrison, spread crime scene photos across the conference table with clinical detachment. The prosecution's case is entirely circumstantial without the murder weapon. They have motive, opportunity, and timeline evidence, but nothing that definitively places Whitmore at the scene during the commission of the crime. Kane nodded approvingly. "Exactly. And their star witness is a preschooler who was hiding in a closet during the alleged incident." Children that age are notoriously unreliable. Their memories are malleable, influenced by suggestion and colored by trauma-induced fantasy. We have a dozen child psychologists ready to testify that 4-year-olds cannot distinguish between reality and imagination under the best of circumstances, much less after witnessing something traumatic. She moved to a whiteboard covered with photographs and timeline charts, tapping at image of Detective Rodriguez with her pointer. Then there's the canine evidence issue. The prosecution wants to use a police dog's discoveries as primary evidence in a murder trial. We're going to challenge every aspect of that: the training protocols, the chain of custody, the possibility of contamination or planted evidence. Dogs are animals, not forensic scientists. The strategy session was interrupted by Kane's secretary announcing the arrival of District Attorney Rebecca Stone's response to their motion to exclude the child's testimony. Kane scanned the document quickly, her lips curving into a predatory smile. "They're actually going to put her on the stand," she announced to her team. "They're so desperate to make their case that they're willing to traumatize this child further by forcing her to testify in open court. This gives us an incredible opportunity to demonstrate prosecutorial misconduct and child endangerment." Across the city in the district attorney's office, Rebecca Stone was having a very different... Silenced the vulnerable. "I know this case is unprecedented," Stone addressed her assembled prosecutors, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the challenge ahead. "We're asking a jury to trust the testimony of a 4-year-old witness and the investigative abilities of a police dog. But sometimes, precedent needs to be challenged. Sometimes the system needs to evolve to protect those who can't protect themselves." Her chief prosecutor, David Chen, no relation to the victim, reviewed the evidence files with practiced efficiency. "The circumstantial case is strong: motive, opportunity, timeline, and behavioral pattern. But Kane is right about our weaknesses. Without the murder weapon or definitive physical evidence, we're asking the jury to make a leap of faith. Then we make sure that leap is as small as possible, Stone replied. We bring in the best child psychologists to explain how trauma affects memory, why children can be remarkably accurate witnesses under certain circumstances. We demonstrate that this little girl's testimony is corroborated by physical evidence and timeline analysis. And we show the jury that Detective Rodriguez and Zeus have a track record of reliable evidence discovery that speaks for itself. The case had already generated intense media attention and legal scrutiny. Law schools were preparing to use it as a teaching tool for future attorneys, regardless of the outcome. Child advocacy groups had rallied behind Lily's right to be heard, while defense attorneys nationwide watched nervously as the prosecution prepared to set precedents that could affect their future cases. Stone understood the implications of failure. If they lost this case, it would send a message to wealthy predators everywhere that children's voices could be silenced through expensive legal maneuvering and character assassination. But success would establish new protections for child witnesses and validate innovative investigative techniques that could solve countless cold cases. As both legal teams prepared for what promised to be the trial of the decade, the stakes extended far beyond Marcus Whitmore's guilt or innocence. They were fighting for the future of justice itself, whether wealth and influence would continue to provide immunity from consequences, or whether the voices of the vulnerable would finally be heard and believed. In her hospital room, surrounded by child psychologists and victim advocates, 4-year-old Lily Chen continued to draw pictures with her crayons, unaware that her innocent testimony would soon challenge the very foundations of the legal system and potentially save countless other children from suffering the same fate as her beloved mother. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for justice was about to begin. The pediatric wing of Metropolitan General Hospital had seen its share of broken children, but 4-year-old Lily Chen presented a case that challenged even the most experienced trauma specialists. 3 days had passed since the horrific discovery in her home, and the little girl hadn't spoken a single word, hadn't taken more than a few sips of water, and flinched violently at every unexpected sound that penetrated the carefully controlled environment of her private room. Dr. Emma Torres, the hospital's chief child psychologist, studied the small figure, curled in the oversized hospital bed, clutching the blood-stained teddy bear that had been her companion through the worst night of her young life. At 42, Dr. Torres had dedicated her career to helping children navigate trauma that adults could barely comprehend. But Lily's case presented unique challenges that kept her awake at night, searching through research journals and consulting with colleagues across the country. The selective mutism is a protective mechanism, Dr. Torres explained quietly to Maria Chen Santos, Sarah's younger sister, who had flown in from Phoenix the moment she'd heard the devastating news. Her mind is shielding her from having to process or verbalize what she witnessed. It's actually a sign of psychological resilience, not weakness. Maria nodded, though her red-rimmed eyes showed she was struggling to understand how her vibrant, chatty niece had been reduced to this silent, trembling shadow. At 28, Maria had never imagined she'd be thrust into the role of guardian for a traumatized child, while simultaneously grieving the loss of her beloved older sister. The legal guardianship papers felt heavy in her purse, a responsibility she'd accepted without hesitation, but felt utterly unprepared to handle. Will she ever be normal again? Maria whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. Dr. Torres chose her words carefully. Children are remarkably resilient, but recovery from this level of trauma takes time, patience, and specialized care. The nightmares, the regression to infantile behaviors, the hypervigilance, these are all normal responses to abnormal circumstances. What concerns me most is the complete withdrawal from verbal communication. It suggests she witnessed something so terrifying that her mind is protecting her, by refusing to let her talk about it. The nights were the hardest. Lily would wake screaming, her small body drenched in sweat, her eyes wide with terror, as she searched the darkened room for monsters that existed only in her memory. The hospital staff had learned to approach her slowly, speaking in soft voices and moving with deliberate calm to avoid triggering her startled response. Even the gentlest touch could send her into a panic, her body curling into a defensive ball, as if expecting another attack. During the day, Lily exhibited behaviors typical of children half her age. She'd wet herself repeatedly, refused solid food, and could only be comforted by sucking her thumb while clutching Mr. Button. The emotional state of a toddler by trauma that no child should ever endure. Dr. Torres had immediately implemented a comprehensive treatment plan that challenged conventional approaches to childhood trauma therapy. Rather than pushing for verbal communication, she focused on creating a safe space where Lily could begin to process her experience through non-threatening mediums. The hospital room had been transformed into a child-friendly environment with soft lighting, colorful artwork, and carefully selected toys that encouraged expression without demanding interaction. "We're going to take this very slowly," Dr. Torres explained to the prosecution team during their first consultation. "The legal system has its timeline, but healing doesn't follow court schedules. If we push too hard, too fast, we risk causing additional trauma that could silence her permanently." District Attorney Rebecca Stone listened with growing concern as Dr. Torres outlined the challenges ahead. "Are you saying she might never be able to testify? Because without her testimony, our case against Whitmore becomes significantly weaker." "I'm saying that her psychological well-being must be our primary concern," Dr. Torres replied firmly. "If she can eventually testify, it will be because she's healed enough to feel safe sharing her experience. If we prioritize the legal case over her recovery, we risk losing both." The innovative therapy approach began with art supplies, crayons, markers, and large sheets of paper that invited expression without demanding explanation. Dr. Torres had learned through years of experience that children often communicated through art what they couldn't verbalize, their unconscious minds revealing crucial details through seemingly innocent drawings. For the first week, Lily's artwork consisted of nothing but scribbled black marks, angry, chaotic lines that filled entire pages with darkness. Dr. Torres carefully preserved each drawing, understanding that even this destructive expression represented progress in processing trauma. Maria visited daily, bringing familiar items from Lily's bedroom, favorite books, a soft blanket that smelled like home, photographs of happier times with her mother. But Lily showed little recognition of these connections to her previous life, as if that innocent child had been erased by what she'd witnessed. The breakthrough came during the second week, when Lily finally picked up a red crayon and began to draw recognizable shapes. Dr. Torres watched with professional fascination and personal heartbreak as the little girl created her first representational artwork since the attack. Stick figures that told a story too terrible for words. The drawing showed a small figure hiding, while larger figures seemed to struggle in the center of the page. Red crayon covered much of the scene, applied with such force that it had torn through the paper in several places. A figure with distinctive features. A scar on the left hand, a watch on the wrist. Details that only someone who had been present that night could know. "This is significant progress," Dr. Torres murmured to herself, carefully documenting the drawing and noting the specific details that might prove crucial to the investigation. She's ready to start telling her story, even if she can't use words yet. As if responding to some internal signal, Lily looked up from her artwork for the first time in 2 weeks, her dark eyes meeting Dr. Torres's gaze with an intensity that spoke of secrets waiting to be shared. The art therapy sessions became a daily ritual that both Dr. Torres and Lily anticipated with careful hope. Each morning, the child psychologist would arrange fresh supplies on the small table in Lily's hospital room. Crayons sorted by color, clean sheets of paper, and sometimes special materials like finger paints or colored chalk that invited tactile expression. The routine provided structure in a world that had become terrifyingly unpredictable for the traumatized child. Lily's artistic evolution told a story that legal experts would later analyze frame by frame. But Dr. Torres saw something more profound in each drawing. A little girl fighting to reclaim her voice through the only medium that felt safe. The progression from chaotic black scribbles to recognizable images represented a journey from the depths of trauma toward the possibility of healing. The third week brought a series of drawings that made Dr. Torres's breath catch in her throat. Lily had moved beyond simple stick figures to create detailed scenes that revealed an almost photographic memory of that terrible night. Her innocent artistic interpretation included details that only someone present during the crime could possibly know. The position of furniture, the pattern of blood spatter, and most importantly, specific characteristics of the perpetrator that hadn't been released to the public. She's drawing the same scar on his hand in every picture, Dr. Torres noted in her clinical observations, photographing each artwork with meticulous care. And that watch, it appears in multiple drawings, always on the left wrist, always with the same distinctive design. The red crayon remained Lily's tool of choice for depicting the violence she'd witnessed, but her application had evolved from angry scribbles to deliberate representation. She drew her mother lying still, surrounded by what she clearly understood was blood, even if she couldn't verbalize the concept of death. The figure of the attacker loomed large in these drawings, his face rendered with the simplified features of a child's art, but containing enough specific details to be legally significant. Dr. Torres documented each session with scientific precision while maintaining the warm, supportive presence that Lily needed to feel safe. Every drawing was
Lily's behavior during creation. The artwork was becoming a visual testimony that might prove crucial in court, but Torres never lost sight of her primary mission, helping a traumatized child begin to heal. The level of detail is remarkable, she explained to the prosecution team during a confidential briefing. Children this age typically draw in very general terms, happy faces, simple houses, basic representations. But trauma can sometimes create what we call hypervigilant memory, where threatening details are recorded with unusual clarity as a survival mechanism. The legal implications were staggering. Jennifer Walsh, the victim advocate assigned to protect Lily's interests throughout the legal process, joined the therapy team to ensure that the child's welfare remained paramount, even as her artwork became evidence. Walsh had spent 15 years fighting for children's rights in the legal system, and she understood both the potential value and the dangers of using a child's art as testimony. "We have to be incredibly careful about how we present this," Walsh cautioned during a strategy meeting. "The defense will argue that we're interpreting random drawings to fit our narrative. We need to demonstrate that these details are coming from Lily's memory, not from adult suggestion or media exposure." The breakthrough that everyone had been hoping for came during a particularly intensive art therapy session. Lily had been working on a drawing that showed the familiar scene, her mother, the scary man, the red everywhere, when she suddenly looked up at Dr. Torres with eyes that seemed much older than her 4 years. "Bad man hurt mommy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from weeks of silence. Dr. Torres felt her heart skip a beat, but she maintained her calm, professional demeanor, knowing that this moment was crucial for both Lily's healing and the pursuit of justice. "Yes, sweetheart, the bad man hurt Mommy. You're very brave for telling me." Lily pointed to the figure in her drawing, the one with the distinctive scar and watch. "He was mean to Mommy. He made her cry." "Can you tell me more about the bad man?" Dr. Torres asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. But Lily had retreated back into silence, exhausted by the effort of speaking those first words since the attack. She returned to her drawing, adding more details to the figure, a face that, while simplified by a child's artistic limitations, contained enough specific features to be compared with photographs of Marcus Whitmore. The session ended with Lily falling asleep at the art table, her small hand still clutching the red crayon that had become her instrument of testimony. Dr. Torres carefully moved her to the bed, preserving the artwork that would soon become central evidence in a murder trial. As she photographed the latest drawing, Dr. Torres noticed something that made her pulse quicken. In the corner of the page, almost hidden among the chaotic red marks, Lily had drawn something new, a small figure hiding behind what looked like a door, watching the terrible scene unfold. It was the first time Lily had depicted herself as a witness rather than just drawing the crime scene. The implications were clear. Lily was ready to acknowledge her role as a survivor and witness. She was beginning to understand that her memory, however painful, might be the key to ensuring that the bad man couldn't hurt anyone else's Mommy. Dr. Torres made a note in her clinical file. Patient has achieved significant breakthrough in verbal communication and self-identification as witness. Recommend continued art therapy with gradual introduction of testimony preparation techniques. Psychological readiness for limited legal participation may be possible within 4 to 6 weeks, pending continued progress. The drawings spread across her desk told a story of unimaginable trauma and remarkable resilience. In the hands of prosecutors, they would become weapons in the fight for justice. But for Dr. Torres, they represented something even more important. A little girl finding her voice in the darkness, preparing to speak truth that could protect other children from the monster who had destroyed her world. The conference room in the district attorney's office had been transformed into a strategic command center for what everyone understood would be an unprecedented legal battle. Charts covered the walls, displaying timeline evidence, witness statements, and most prominently, enlarged photographs of Lily's artwork that would form the foundation of their case against Marcus Whitmore. District Attorney Rebecca Stone stood at the center of it all, weighing the impossible decision that could determine both the outcome of a murder trial and the future well-being of a traumatized child. "We're asking her to relive the worst moment of her life in front of strangers, cameras, and the man who killed her mother," Stone said, her voice heavy with the moral complexity of the situation. "But without her testimony, Whitmore walks free and potentially kills again." Dr. Torres had joined the prosecution team for this crucial planning session, her clinical expertise essential in determining whether Lily could psychologically handle the demands of testifying. Beside her, victim advocate Jennifer Walsh reviewed the proposed courtroom accommodations that would attempt to minimize the trauma of a child witness facing cross-examination by one of the city's most ruthless defense attorneys. "The special accommodations we're requesting are unprecedented," Walsh explained, consulting her extensive notes. "Closed-circuit television testimony, so she doesn't have to face Whitmore directly, a therapy dog for emotional support, frequent breaks, and the presence of both Dr. Torres and myself throughout her testimony. Judge Harrison will have to approve each modification, and you can bet Victoria Kane will fight every single one." Already begun with a barrage of motions designed to exclude Lily's testimony entirely. Kane's arguments were sophisticated and compelling. 4-year-olds lacked the cognitive development to distinguish reality from fantasy. Their memories were easily contaminated by adult suggestion, and the trauma of witnessing violence made any testimony inherently unreliable. Legal precedents from across the country supported her position, creating a formidable barrier for the prosecution to overcome. Kane is also challenging the admissibility of the artwork, Stone noted, reviewing the latest defense filings. She's arguing that Dr. Torres led Lily to create specific images that support the prosecution's narrative, essentially manufacturing evidence through therapeutic manipulation. The media attention surrounding the case had created additional complications that threatened to overwhelm the careful protective measures around Lily. News vans lined the street outside the hospital. Reporters attempted to interview anyone connected to the case, and social media buzzed with opinions about whether children should ever be required to testify in murder trials. The public debate had polarized along predictable lines, child advocates demanding justice for Sarah Chen, while others argued that using a traumatized preschooler as a witness constituted legal abuse. Dr. Torres had implemented strict security protocols to protect Lily from the media circus. Her hospital room was moved to a secure wing with limited access, and all staff members underwent background checks before being allowed contact with the child. Even Maria, Lily's guardian, had been assigned a security detail after receiving threatening phone calls from individuals who believed the prosecution was exploiting a vulnerable child for political gain. The community support has been overwhelming, Walsh reported, reviewing letters and cards that had poured in from across the country. Children's advocacy groups, domestic violence organizations, and individual families who faced similar tragedies are all rallying behind Lily's right to be heard. But we're also getting death threats and protests from people who think we're traumatizing her further. The courthouse had been forced to implement extraordinary security measures in anticipation of the trial. Metal detectors, bag searches, and additional armed guards would create an atmosphere more suited to a terrorism trial than a domestic violence case. Special entrances and exits were being prepared to shield Lily from the media attention and potential harassment from Whitmore's supporters. Judge Harrison's chambers had become the battleground for preliminary hearings that would determine the admissibility of both Lily's testimony and her artwork. The veteran jurist, known for his careful consideration across the country, had submitted amicus briefs supporting both sides, turning the case into a referendum on the rights of child witnesses in the American legal system. The judge is genuinely struggling with this, Stone observed after the latest hearing. He understands the legal implications, but he's also clearly moved by Lily's situation. Harrison has grandchildren Lily's age. This case is affecting him on a personal level. The prosecution team had brought in child testimony experts from around the world, creating innovative protocols for presenting a preschooler's evidence in a way that would be both legally admissible and psychologically protective. Mock courtrooms had been constructed to help Lily practice testifying in a safe environment, with therapy sessions designed to prepare her for the stress of cross-examination. "She's stronger than we initially hoped," Dr. Torres reported to the team. "The art therapy has given her a way to process the trauma, and her verbal communication is improving daily. She understands
that the bad man needs to face consequences for hurting her mother, and she wants to help make sure he can't hurt other families. The final decision came on a gray Thursday morning, when Judge Harrison called all parties to his chambers for an unprecedented closed-doors session. With Lily's guardian present and court reporters documenting every word, the judge announced his ruling that would set legal precedent for decades to come. After careful consideration of all arguments and expert testimony, Judge Harrison declared, his voice carrying the weight of history, "I find that this child has the right to be heard, and that the special accommodations requested by the prosecution adequately protect her welfare while preserving the defendant's right to a fair trial. The testimony will be allowed under the conditions outlined in the court's written order." Victoria Kane's face flushed with barely controlled anger as she realized her primary strategy had failed. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal this ruling immediately. This decision sets a dangerous precedent that will be used to exploit traumatized children across the country." But Judge Harrison's mind was made. "The appeal is your right, Counselor. But this court will not silence a witness simply because of her age, when she may hold the key to preventing future tragedies." As the legal teams filed out of chambers, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Lily Chen, barely 4 years old, would take the stand to face the man who had murdered her mother. Protected by unprecedented legal accommodations, but carrying the weight of justice on her small shoulders. The trial that would determine Marcus Whitmore's fate and potentially save countless other children was ready to begin. Papers published in law enforcement journals worldwide. The 5-year-old German Shepherd's extraordinary 98% success rate in evidence recovery had made him a legend within police departments across 3 states. But more importantly, he had become Detective Maria Rodriguez's most trusted partner in the pursuit of justice for victims whose voices had been silenced forever. Rodriguez remembered the day she'd first met Zeus at the military training facility outside the city. He'd been deemed too intense for standard military operations, his focus so laser-sharp that he ignored commands when pursuing a scent trail, his dedication so absolute that handlers worried about his psychological well-being. What the military saw as problematic obsession, Rodriguez recognized as the exact quality needed for cold case investigations and complex crime scenes where other methods had failed. Their partnership had been forged through 18 months of intensive training that went far beyond traditional K-9 protocols. Rodriguez learned to read Zeus's body language with the precision of a behavioral scientist. The subtle changes in his gait that indicated interest, the specific way his ears positioned when he detected relevant scents, the focused intensity that overtook his entire demeanor when he was closing in on crucial evidence. In return, Zeus developed an almost telepathic connection with his human partner, responding to her moods and instincts with the sensitivity of a trained psychologist. The cases they'd solved together read like a catalog of law enforcement miracles. The Morrison kidnapping case, where Zeus had tracked a child's scent through 17 miles of dense forest to locate a hidden cabin where she was being held. The Peterson murder investigation, where he'd found the victim's jewelry buried under 3 feet of concrete in an abandoned warehouse basement. The Williams arson case, where his detection of accelerant traces led to the conviction of a serial arsonist who'd evaded capture for 8 years. But Sarah Chen's murder was testing the limits of even Zeus's extraordinary abilities. Rodriguez watched her partner work with scientific fascination and growing frustration
as they methodically searched location after location without success. Zeus approached each potential site with the same focused intensity, his powerful nose processing thousands of scent molecules that human senses couldn't detect. He could distinguish between different types of metal, identify specific blood chemistry patterns, and follow scent trails that had been contaminated by rain, time, and deliberate attempts at concealment. The initial searches at the Chen crime scene had yielded important evidence. Zeus had confirmed the presence of a second person in the house, tracked movement patterns through different rooms, and identified specific areas where the attacker had lingered. But the murder weapon remained elusive and ruthless in her partner's behavior. Zeus was accustomed to success, to the satisfaction of finding what others had missed. This case was challenging his confidence in ways that concerned Rodriguez deeply. "He knows something's missing," Rodriguez explained to District Attorney Stone during one of their progress meetings. "Zeus has this way of showing agitation when he can't complete a search successfully. He keeps returning to the same areas. Like he's telling me the scent trail leads somewhere we haven't looked yet." The systematic grid searches had expanded to cover potential dump sites throughout the metropolitan area. Rodriguez and Zeus had worked through abandoned lots, construction sites, drainage systems, and wooded areas where a killer might dispose of evidence. Each location was approached with scientific methodology. Zeus would work in carefully planned patterns, while Rodriguez documented his reactions and behavior changes that might indicate proximity to relevant evidence. The searches were physically exhausting for both partners. Zeus would work for hours without rest when he was on a promising trail, his dedication so complete that Rodriguez had to force him to take breaks for water and food. She'd learned to recognize the signs of his fatigue, the slight decrease in precision, the momentary hesitation before following a scent, and would call off searches before his effectiveness was compromised. "He's not just a dog," Rodriguez often explained to colleagues who didn't understand the depth of their partnership. "Zeus processes information in ways that complement human investigative techniques. He doesn't make assumptions, doesn't get distracted by theories or biases. He follows the evidence wherever it leads, even when it doesn't match what we expect to find." The bond between them extended beyond professional collaboration into something approaching family relationship. Zeus lived with Rodriguez, shared her daily routines, and seemed to understand the emotional weight of their work. After particularly difficult crime scenes, he would position himself close to her, offering the silent comfort that only animals could provide. Rodriguez, who had never married or had children, found in Zeus the kind of unconditional loyalty and shared purpose that gave meaning to her demanding career. As the weeks passed without find what he was looking for, sometimes it just took longer than expected. The breakthrough would come from an unexpected source, a court order
that would give them access to search the one location where Marcus Whitmore felt most secure, most protected by his wealth and social standing. The killer's own property would become the site where Zeus would demonstrate once again why he was considered the most gifted evidence detection dog in the country. Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of anticipation as she reviewed the search warrant. Tomorrow, she and Zeus would finally get the chance to complete their investigation of Sarah Chen's murder, and she had absolute confidence that her partner would find what they needed to ensure that justice was served. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 15 acres of meticulously maintained grounds that spoke of wealth so vast it could reshape landscapes according to personal whim. As Detective Rodriguez guided Zeus through the ornate iron gates, she couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between this pristine sanctuary and the brutal crime they were investigating. The mansion itself was an architectural masterpiece, a blend of classical European design and modern luxury that had graced the covers of home design magazines and served as the backdrop for countless charity galas attended by the city's social elite. Marcus Whitmore watched from his study window on the second floor, his usually composed demeanor betraying signs of nervous energy that his attorneys hadn't seen during previous encounters with law enforcement. His manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany window frame as he observed the search team assembling on his front lawn. Detective Rodriguez, with her German Shepherd partner, crime scene technicians with their equipment cases, and his own legal team, led by Victoria Kane, who had insisted on being present to ensure proper procedures were followed. "This is harassment, pure and simple," Kane declared to the assembled officers, her voice carrying across the perfectly manicured lawn. "My client has cooperated fully with this investigation, and this intrusive search of his private property represents a fishing expedition by prosecutors desperate to manufacture evidence against an innocent man." But Rodriguez was focused entirely on Zeus, who had begun his methodical examination of the grounds with the systematic precision that had made him legendary among law enforcement agencies. The dog's behavior was immediately different from their previous searches. There was an alertness in his posture, a focused intensity that suggested he was detecting scents relevant to their investigation. The estate's grounds were a testament to horticultural perfection. Imported Italian marble statues dotted the landscape between precisely trimmed hedges and flower beds that looked like they belonged in a botanical museum. The rose garden, Whitmore's particular pride, occupied the eastern section of the property. Hundreds of prize-winning specimens arranged in geometric patterns that created a breathtaking display of color and fragrance during blooming season. Zeus approached the rose garden with increasing interest, his powerful nose processing the complex mixture of floral scents, fertilizers, and something else that made his body language shift into the focused determination Rodriguez had learned to recognize as a promising lead. His movements became more deliberate, his attention more concentrated as he worked through the carefully maintained beds with scientific precision. "He's found something," Rodriguez murmured to the crime scene photographer, who began documenting Zeus's behavior changes for potential use as evidence. The dog's training had included protocols for alerting his handler to significant discoveries without contaminating potential evidence, a delicate balance between natural canine behavior and forensic requirements. From his window, Whitmore's anxiety became increasingly visible. His face had gone pale, and his hands pressed against the glass with enough force to leave fingerprints on the expensive custom panes. Kane noticed her client's distress and moved toward the mansion, but kept one eye on the search team whose activities were becoming more focused on the rose garden area. Zeus stopped at a specific location near the center of the garden, where a particularly beautiful specimen of deep red roses created a natural focal point for the entire display.
His behavior became the controlled alertness that Rodriguez had seen dozens of times before. The moment when her partner had located exactly what they'd been searching for. "Mark this location," Rodriguez instructed the crime scene team, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Zeus has identified something significant here." The excavation began with archaeological precision. Crime scene technicians used small tools to carefully remove layers of soil and mulch, photographing each stage of the process to maintain chain of custody documentation that would be crucial for courtroom presentation. The rose bush was carefully uprooted and set aside, revealing disturbed earth that looked different from the surrounding soil composition. 18 inches below the surface, wrapped in what appeared to be a woman's silk scarf, the team discovered the murder weapon that had eluded their searches for weeks. The knife emerged from the earth like an accusation, its blade still stained with Sarah Chen's blood, despite attempts at cleaning, its handle bearing microscopic traces that would later be matched to Marcus Whitmore's DNA through advanced forensic analysis. But Zeus's discovery was far from complete. His continued interest in the immediate area suggested additional evidence remained buried beneath the carefully maintained rose garden. As the excavation expanded, the full horror of Marcus Whitmore's crimes began to emerge from the earth that had been
meant to conceal them forever. The crime scene technicians worked with meticulous care as additional items appeared. Jewelry that would later be identified as belonging to missing women from across the region, driver's licenses, and personal effects that told stories of lives cut short by a predator who had used his wealth and social standing to operate with impunity for years. Rodriguez felt a mixture of vindication and horror as Zeus's extraordinary abilities revealed the true scope of the investigation they were dealing with. Her faith in her partner had been justified once again, but the evidence emerging from Whitmore's rose garden suggested they were dealing with something far more sinister than a single domestic violence homicide. From the mansion window, Marcus Whitmore watched his carefully constructed world crumble, with each item the search team extracted from his property. The rose garden that had been his pride, the symbol of his control over his environment, had become the repository of evidence that would destroy the public persona he'd spent years cultivating. Victoria Kane's confident demeanor began to crack as she realized the implications of what Zeus had discovered. This wasn't just about defending a wealthy client against a murder charge. They were looking at potential serial killer charges that would make Marcus Whitmore one of the most notorious criminals in the city's history. As the sun set over the Whitmore estate, crime scene lights illuminated the rose garden that had become an outdoor crime lab. Zeus lay contentedly beside Rodriguez, his job completed with the thoroughness that had made him a legend. The murder weapon that would provide crucial evidence in Sarah Chen's case was just the beginning of revelations that would reshape the investigation and provide closure for families who had spent years wondering what had happened to their missing daughters. The evidence emerging from Marcus Whitmore's rose garden painted a horrifying picture that transformed a domestic violence murder case into a serial killer investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions and several years. As crime scene technicians carefully cataloged each item recovered from the meticulously maintained flower beds, Detective Rodriguez realized she was looking at the preserved trophies of a predator who had operated with calculated precision while hiding behind a facade of wealth and respectability. Jessica Martinez's driver's license, reported missing 3 years ago when the young attorney had supposedly relocated for a new job opportunity, lay preserved in a waterproof container alongside her distinctive silver bracelet, a graduation gift from her parents that she'd never removed. Amanda Foster's art gallery business cards, still legible despite their burial, were found with her custom-designed engagement ring, the one she'd been wearing when she'd supposedly gone hiking alone in the mountains.
Rachel Williams, the investigative journalist whose screaming his car accident had seemed so tragically random, was represented by her press credentials and the distinctive vintage watch her grandfather had given her when she'd landed her first newspaper job. 3 additional victims that we can immediately identify, Rodriguez reported to District Attorney Stone during an emergency briefing that stretched late into the night. The forensic analysis is still ongoing, but preliminary DNA testing confirms that these items belong to women who had been reported missing over the past 4 years. All of them had documented relationships with Marcus Whitmore. The investigation expanded exponentially as law enforcement agencies from neighboring counties and states began reviewing their own cold cases involving missing women who might have crossed paths with Whitmore's business empire or social circle. His real estate holdings, charity work, and country club memberships had provided him with access to potential victims across a wide geographic area, creating opportunities for predatory behavior that had gone undetected by individual jurisdictions working in isolation. The methodical nature of the trophy collection revealed a killer who had taken satisfaction in preserving mementos of his crimes, but who had also been arrogant enough to believe that his wealth and social standing would protect him from serious investigation. Each item had been carefully cleaned and stored in containers designed for long-term preservation. The behavior of someone who intended to revisit these memories repeatedly over time. "This changes everything," Stone acknowledged, as she reviewed the expanding evidence files. "We're not just prosecuting a domestic violence homicide anymore, we're looking at a serial killer who used his resources and social position to select and eliminate victims who dared to reject his control." The families of the newly identified victims experienced a complex mixture of relief and renewed grief as they finally learned the fate of daughters, sisters, and friends who had simply vanished from their lives. The Martinez family had spent 3 years believing Jessica had chosen to cut contact with them after accepting a prestigious job offer in another state. The discovery of her driver's license and personal effects in Whitmore's garden forced them to confront the reality that their daughter had been murdered by someone they'd never suspected. Jessica was so excited about getting away from him, her mother, Carmen Martinez, told investigators through tears of rage and sorrow. She said Marcus gave her the creeps, that he wouldn't accept that she wasn't interested in a serious relationship. We thought she was being dramatic. He seemed so charming and successful when we met him at her law firm's Christmas party. The expansion of charges against Marcus Whitmore sent shockwaves through the legal community and the city's social elite. Victoria Kane found herself defending a client, manageable domestic violence situation, into a death penalty prosecution that would dominate headlines for months. The evidence Zeus had uncovered made plea negotiations virtually impossible. The prosecution now had physical proof of multiple murders, and public outrage demanded full accountability. Whitmore's carefully constructed public image crumbled as media investigations revealed the pattern of manipulation and control that had characterized his relationships with all the identified victims. Each woman had followed a similar trajectory: initial charm and lavish attention from a wealthy, successful man, followed by increasing demands for exclusivity and control, culminating in their attempts to end relationships that had become suffocating and frightening. The business community that had once celebrated Whitmore as a visionary leader now scrambled to distance themselves from his empire. Charity organizations returned his donations, country clubs revoked his memberships, and business partners initiated legal proceedings to dissolve their professional relationships. The man who had used wealth and social connections as tools for predation found himself isolated and facing the possibility of multiple death sentences. The forensic evidence is overwhelming. Rodriguez summarized during a press conference that attracted national media attention. Zeus's discovery in the defendant's rose garden has provided definitive proof linking Marcus Whitmore to the murders of at least 4 women, with the investigation continuing as we examine additional cold cases that may be connected to his criminal activities. The legal precedent being established extended beyond the specific charges against Whitmore. Zeus's role in uncovering the crucial evidence sparked discussions about the admissibility of canine discoveries in capital cases, while Lily Chen's impending testimony continued to challenge traditional approaches to child witnesses in criminal proceedings. As additional charges were filed and the case evolved into one of the most significant serial killer prosecutions in the city's history, Detective Rodriguez reflected on the journey that had led from a traumatized child hiding in a closet to the exposure of a predator who had operated with impunity for years. Zeus's extraordinary abilities had not only solved Sarah Chen's murder, but had provided justice for multiple families and potentially prevented future victims from suffering the same fate. The rose garden that Marcus Whitmore had cultivated as a symbol of his control and perfection had become the graveyard of his secrets, transformed by Zeus's remarkable gifts into the source of evidence that would ensure the killer faced the full consequences of his crimes against women who had dared to seek freedom from his suffocating control. Victoria Kane's private office resembled a war room designed by someone who knew reputations were built by dismantling opposition witnesses. The walls were lined with legal tomes and glowing monitors filled with case law, psychological research, and forensic analyses. At 52, Kane had built her career on tactics others called unethical, turning certain defeat into career-defining victories through intellectual ruthlessness. The Marcus Whitmore case was a pinnacle, media-frenzied, precedent-setting, and with stakes that could cement her as the attorney who could beat any prosecution. The state wants to convict our client on the word of a traumatized preschooler and the findings of a police dog, she told her team. We will show both are fundamentally unreliable. Her research on child witnesses unearthed studies questioning the reliability of young children's memories, especially under trauma and therapeutic influence. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, a respected child psychologist, would testify that preschoolers were highly suggestible, prone to false memories shaped by adult cues. Additional experts were lined up. Dr. Michael Chen to challenge blood spatter analysis, Professor Janet Williams to suggest police misconduct, and former canine trainer Dr. Robert Sterling to attack canine evidence as unscientific and easily influenced by handlers. Dogs aren't forensic scientists, Kane told a reporter, framing Zeus, the police dog, as an unreliable instrument. She also claimed Detective Rodriguez had tunnel vision, manipulating evidence to fit a predetermined narrative. Private investigators dug through Rodriguez's career, surfacing every procedural misstep. In court, Kane sought to exclude Zeus's discoveries entirely, arguing the search exceeded the warrant and violated Fourth Amendment protections. Dr. Sterling testified that dogs could be swayed by handler bias, environmental contamination, and irrelevant scents. Zeus may be well-trained, but he's still an animal, he told the court. The attack on 4-year-old Lily's testimony was equally thorough. Developmental psychologist Dr. Patricia Summers explained that children that age often couldn't distinguish real memories from dreams or stories, especially after trauma. Kane argued that therapy sessions with Dr. Emma Torres had implanted or shaped Lily's recollections. Kane also engaged in aggressive victim blaming, painting Sarah Chen as unstable, citing unsubstantiated domestic violence claims in her divorce and family accounts of overreaction to perceived threats. For Rodriguez, Kane's cross-examination was withering. From the moment you arrived at the scene, you decided my client was guilty, didn't you? Judge Harrison faced novel legal territory. Rarely did murder trials hinge on such a young witness or a dog's findings. The prosecution countered hard. Dr. Torres defended Lily's reliability, pointing to consistent, specific details matching independent evidence. They presented Zeus's documented successes and the science behind canine scent detection. Hearings dragged on for weeks. Scholars filed amicus briefs. Advocacy groups for children's rights and defense liberties crowded the courthouse steps, waving signs that clashed like opposing battle flags. Justice for Sarah versus protect our constitutional rights. Media trucks lined the streets, feeding a public hungry for every twist. Kane understood public opinion could shape jury selection and appeals. She hired Patterson Media Strategies to portray Whitmore as the victim of prosecutorial overreach, accusing the state of weaponizing a traumatized child. "This isn't justice, it's persecution," she declared at a press conference timed for evening news. Leaks painted Lily as manipulated, Dr. Torres as biased, and Rodriguez as career-driven. Conservative commentators echoed her warnings about dangerous precedent. The prosecution's public posture was more restrained, focusing on Sarah Chen's story as a domestic violence victim failed by the system. "This is about whether wealth can buy immunity from violent crime," D.A. Stone told reporters. Social media split along ideological lines. Hashtag Justice for Sarah battling hashtag Protect Our Rights. Death threats arrived for Rodriguez, Stone, and even Judge Harrison, forcing protective measures. Kane's framing that the case tested whether wealthy defendants could get a fair trial in a biased system found fertile ground with some potential jurors. For the prosecution, the challenge was to keep support without further harming Lily. They stressed the broader stakes, holding powerful abusers accountable, valuing child witnesses, and validating innovative investigative tools. Domestic violence advocates rallied to Sarah's memory, warning of the precedent set if Whitmore walked free. As the circus grew, Judge Harrison imposed a media blackout. No photos of Lily, limited access during her testimony, and restrictions on evidence coverage. "The First Amendment doesn't allow the press to traumatize a child," he ruled. Press freedom advocates protested, while child welfare groups applauded. The blackout became yet another ideological battlefield. Inside and outside court, the Whitmore trial had become more than a murder case. It was a referendum on the balance between defendants' rights and the voices of vulnerable victims, the credibility of canine forensics, and how far wealth could bend the scales of justice. Whether Kane's dismantling of unconventional evidence would carry the jury, or whether the emotional gravity of Lily's story and Zeus's record would hold, remained the question that had an entire nation watching. The Metropolitan Courthouse had become a fortress of justice. Armed officers flanked its neoclassical columns, media barricades stretched for blocks, and bomb-sniffing dogs swept the halls. Inside, courtroom 4A had been 4-year-old Lily Chen. District Attorney Rebecca Stone rose first, her navy suit and steady voice signaling resolve. She framed the case as the murder of Dr. Sarah Chen, a devoted mother who had left an abusive, controlling man. Stone promised to show a pattern of predatory behavior spanning years, multiple victims, and cover-ups enabled by wealth and influence. Lily, she said, had witnessed her mother's killing and would recount the scary man who hurt her, details backed by forensics and Zeus, the police dog whose findings exposed Whitmore's hidden crimes. Stone positioned the trial as a test of whether wealth could shield violent men from justice, while underscoring the validity of child witnesses and canine investigative techniques. Victoria Kane's entrance was as calculated as her defense strategy. In crimson She declared Whitmore the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt. She attacked the prosecution's reliance on a traumatized preschooler and an animal, promising experts who would show 4-year-olds blur reality and fantasy, and that police dogs are subject to bias and environmental influence. Kane urged jurors to resist emotional manipulation and focus on what she cast as weak, unreliable evidence. The prosecution began with Detective Rodriguez, who walked the jury through the morning Sarah Chen's body was found. The ajar front door, the neighbor's 911 call, and inconsistencies with Sarah's security habits. The medical examiner detailed 17 stab wounds, forceful, targeted, suggesting anatomical knowledge. Crime scene analyst Jennifer Walsh reconstructed the attack, an initial struggle in the kitchen, Sarah's attempted escape, and her killing in the living room. Neighbors testified to Whitmore's stalking, idling for hours in his car, making threats. Sarah's sister Maria recounted her fears and the realization that his love was possession. Forensic lab director Dr. Patricia Wong connected the murder weapon, buried in Whitmore's rose garden, to both victim and defendant through DNA and blood analysis. Detective Sarah Martinez tied 3 other missing women to Whitmore, each killed after ending relationships, their belongings also found in his garden. The evidence painted him as a calculating predator who collected trophies. Kane's cross-examinations sought to erode each brick of the prosecution's wall. She pressed Rodriguez on prior investigative criticisms, implying tunnel vision and media ambition. She floated alternative suspects, Sarah's abusive ex-husband and a disgruntled former patient, arguing police ignored them in the rush to prosecute a wealthy target. Forensics were attacked through experts like Dr. Michael Harrison, who called the garden evidence contaminated and the DNA circumstantial. Child psychology experts described preschoolers' susceptibility to suggestion.
Art therapy could have been unintentionally guided. Former canine trainer Dr. Robert Sterling argued Zeus's findings could be swayed by handler cues and occurred long after the crime, allowing for contamination or planting. Character witnesses portrayed Whitmore as a philanthropist, targeted because of his prominence. Kane's narrative: unreliable witnesses, tainted evidence, and a system using an innocent man to make a point. In closing this phase, Kane insisted the prosecution wants you to convict based on a preschooler's words and a dog's behavior. This is not justice. It's a witch hunt that threatens every citizen's rights. Confident she'd ceded reasonable doubt, she looked ahead to the pivotal moment, Lily Chen's testimony, which could either dissolve her careful defense or pierce it completely. Courtroom 4A had been transformed after months of collaboration between legal experts, child psychologists, and tech specialists. A groundbreaking shift in how traumatized young witnesses could testify. Every change balanced 2 competing imperatives: protecting the child's emotional safety and preserving the defendant's constitutional right to confront his accuser. The witness stand was rebuilt for a 4-year-old. Gone was the elevated box. In its place sat a small table and chair under warm lighting, surrounded by colorful art made by local schoolchildren. Golden, a calm, certified therapy Labrador, lay beside the table, trained to soothe without distraction. A high-definition closed-circuit system allowed the jury and court to see Lily Chen's testimony without her having to face her mother's killer, Marcus Whitmore. Flanked by Dr. Emma Torres and victim advocate Jennifer Walsh, Lily would testify under safeguards that had never before been tried in the state. The jury's reaction on seeing her was immediate: tears, protective instincts, and a heavy awareness of the responsibility before them. Judge Harrison's opening instructions were firm.
Any behavior that might traumatize the child would mean immediate removal from court. With the press barred and security tight, the room went silent as Lily entered in a simple blue dress, holding Mr. Buttons, the blood-stained teddy bear from the night her mother was killed. Her small steps toward the witness table carried the weight of a history no child should bear. District Attorney Rebecca Stone approached with unusual gentleness. "Hello, Lily. Everyone wants to help you tell us what happened to your mommy." Lily whispered a shy hi, still clutching Mr. Buttons. Stone's questions had been crafted with child psychology input. No leading language, simple phrasing, allowing Lily to tell her story at her own pace. Asked about the night the scary man came, Lily's voice shrank. "He was mean to Mommy. He made her cry, and then she couldn't." Figure hiding. A woman on the ground in red crayon paint, and a tall man with a scar on his hand and a shiny watch. Details matching Whitmore exactly. This accuracy, beyond what coaching could produce, visibly shook the prosecution team. Through gentle breaks, Lily gave consistent details aligning with forensic evidence. The sequence of the attack, hiding in the closet, her fear of being found. Jurors wiped away tears. Whitmore's composure cracked, his defense's alternate theories unraveled. The most devastating moment came when Stone asked what happened after Lily emerged from hiding. "I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't talk to me. There was red paint everywhere and she looked broken." Her sobbing forced a brief recess as Dr. Torres comforted her. When they resumed, Lily whispered, "I was scared he would hurt me too. I stayed very, very quiet so the scary man wouldn't find me." The jury now saw the case not just as a murder trial, but as the attempted murder of a child's innocence. Defense attorney Victoria Kane then faced her most ethically delicate task, cross-examining a 4-year-old. She began with syrupy tones. "Sometimes when scary things happen, our memories can get confused. Maybe you remember things that didn't happen the way you think." She compared Lily's drawings to imaginary princess stories, hinting her testimony might be fantasy. The jury's expressions turned cold. Dr. Torres leaned forward protectively. Judge Harrison watched closely. Kane tried to suggest that adults had told Lily what to remember. But Lily's account, scar, watch, sequence of events, remained unshaken. Her consistent answers under such pressure only deepened juror sympathy. The judge intervened when Kane's tactics caused Lily to withdraw. "This court will not tolerate questioning that causes unnecessary psychological harm." Kane persisted, but her rapid-fire questions failed to create contradictions. Jurors' body language made clear they saw the defense as attacking a victimized child. Finally, Kane asked directly if Lily was sure about what she saw. "I saw him hurt my mommy," Lily said, voice clear despite her sighs. "He's a scary man, and he made her go to sleep forever." The room froze. It was the trial's defining moment. A small child staring down one of the city's most formidable attorneys and holding to her truth. Kane knew any further questioning would only help the prosecution. She returned to her seat, her strategy in ruins. As the court prepared for closing arguments, one fact was clear. The image of Lily in her blue dress, clutching Mr. Buttons, calmly naming her mother's killer, would remain in the jury's mind when they decided Marcus Whitmore's fate, and in legal history as the moment that forever changed how the justice system heard the smallest, most vulnerable voices. The Whitmore Financial District, a fortress of wealth and power where Marcus Whitmore had built his real estate empire. Now it was about to betray him. Detective Rodriguez led her canine partner Zeus across the marble lobby, knowing the court-ordered search might uncover the final proof to expose the predator behind the polished facade. Victoria Kane, Whitmore's formidable defense attorney, had fought the warrant through every legal channel,
arguing it was an unconstitutional fishing expedition. Judge Harrison disagreed, citing Zeus's previous discoveries as probable cause, and allowed invasive searches if the dog alerted. Kane arrived with junior lawyers and a private investigator, intent on documenting any misstep for court. Rodriguez anticipated the scrutiny. She brought extra personnel, crime scene techs, forensic photographers, and evidence specialists, to ensure an airtight chain of custody. Zeus methodically searched floor by floor until reaching Whitmore's private office on the 48th. The space radiated power, million-dollar art, Italian furniture, and panoramic city views. But Zeus's demeanor shifted. He locked onto a section of the east wall, his alert behavior unmistakable. "He's found something," Rodriguez announced. Despite Kane's protests, the warrant allowed structural searches based on Zeus's signals. A construction crew peeled back the paneling to reveal a hidden, fireproof safe. When it was opened, the contents stunned everyone present. A meticulously organized trophy box of a serial killer. Inside, high-resolution surveillance photos of Sarah Chen and other victims: Jessica Martinez, Amanda Foster, Rachel Williams, going about daily life taken without their knowledge. Personal effects, jewelry, driver's licenses, and keepsakes belonging to missing women from multiple states. Most damning was Whitmore's handwritten journal, detailing his stalking, psychological manipulation, and plans for each murder. Entries dripped with entitlement and rage. "Sarah thinks she's so smart with her medical degree and restraining order. No one leaves Marcus Whitmore. She needs to see the consequences before I end this permanently." The journal matched crime scene evidence with chilling precision. Detailed floor plans of victims' homes, notes on entry points, escape routes, and security weaknesses proved calculated premeditation. Metadata on the photos confirmed dates and locations aligned perfectly with the victims' disappearances. State Police Detective Sarah Martinez quickly linked items to at least 6 additional cold case disappearances. Forensic analysis confirmed authenticity through DNA, fingerprints, and comparisons to old case files. What had begun as a domestic homicide case was now an interstate serial murder prosecution. The news of Zeus's discovery shattered Whitmore's composure. In his holding, guarded secrets were now evidence. Kane scrambled to suppress the find, filing an emergency motion to exclude it as an overreach of the warrant and questioning canine reliability. But Harrison ruled the search fully within authorized parameters. "The defendant's rights have been protected. The public interest in prosecuting serial murder outweighs concerns about the invasive nature of the search." With the ruling, Kane knew the case was lost. Her defense strategies, attacking witnesses, undermining forensic timelines, were now irrelevant. She opened plea talks, aiming to avoid the death penalty. D.A. Stone refused. Life without parole, nothing less. Whitmore preyed on women for years. Their families deserve full justice. Whitmore's anger turned on his own lawyer. In meetings he raged, "You promised me acquittal. I'm paying millions and you're telling me there's nothing you can do?" Kane's blunt answer, that no legal skill could erase overwhelming, self-incriminating evidence, only deepened his denial. His outbursts, already alienating the jury, further undercut any residual sympathy. In private, Kane admitted to colleagues she'd never faced a case so airtight. "Every strategy's been demolished by evidence we can't challenge or explain away." As trial's end approached, her focus shifted from acquittal to preserving appeal points, though she knew even that was futile. The Whitmore case would leave lasting marks. precedent for child-friendly courtroom procedures, expanded admissibility for canine-alerted searches, and a public reminder that wealth cannot shield predators forever. And at the center of it was Zeus, the canine whose instincts uncovered the trophies that dismantled Marcus Whitmore's empire and ended his decades-long reign of violence. District Attorney Rebecca Stone rose with the measured dignity of someone who knew her words would decide not only Marcus Whitmore's fate, but also set a precedent for protecting society's most vulnerable from predators who thought wealth could shield them from justice. The courtroom fell silent as she approached the jury, 12 citizens holding the power to either validate months of investigation or let a serial killer walk free. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stone began, her voice steady and commanding, "we have presented evidence so overwhelming, so conclusive, that it eliminates any reasonable doubt about Marcus Whitmore's guilt. This is not circumstantial. It is his own documentation of his crimes, preserved like trophies in a museum of murder." She walked the jury through Sarah Chen's murder, timelines, forensic proof, and Whitmore's surveillance photos, images showing him stalking Dr. Chen as she dropped her daughter Lily at preschool, shopped for groceries, abuse. Stone's voice softened when speaking of Lily's testimony. Lily Chen showed courage most adults could never muster. She faced her mother's killer and told you the truth, detailed, consistent, corroborated by physical evidence. That bravery deserves to be met with justice, so no other family falls victim to Whitmore. She praised Zeus, the German shepherd whose searches uncovered evidence human investigators had missed. Video showed his methodical work in the Rose Garden and Whitmore's office. Detective Rodriguez and Zeus represent the finest traditions of law enforcement, persistence, skill, and commitment to justice. Stone dismantled the defense's theories, showing each was contradicted by forensics, timelines, and Whitmore's own writings. The defense offers speculation and misdirection. Every alternative crumbles against the defendant's own words, photographs, and preserved trophies. Her conclusion expanded beyond Whitmore's crimes. This is about whether money can buy immunity from stalking, terrorizing, and murdering women. Your verdict will speak for every victim who has been silenced. When Victoria Kane rose for the defense, the challenge was monumental. Her opening jab tried to cast doubt. The prosecution wants you to convict based on the testimony of a traumatized 4-year-old and the so-called discoveries of a police dog. She invoked constitutional principles, presumption of innocence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but her words rang hollow against the evidence. Kane's attempts to discredit Lily and Zeus leaned on procedural arguments already rejected by the judge. She painted Whitmore as a philanthropist, targeted by overzealous prosecutors, relying on testimony from business associates and charity board members. But in the shadow of Whitmore's own confessions and trophies, her defense felt paper-thin. The jury listened politely, but skepticism was evident. Several jurors winced at Kane's minimization of the victim's suffering. Others had already been swayed by the child's courage and the dog's decisive discoveries. With both sides finished, the air in the courtroom grew heavy. The jury would decide not just Whitmore's guilt, but the legal boundaries for holding wealthy predators accountable. In the deliberation room, evidence displays and monitors were ready for systematic review. The jurors elected Harold Martinez, a calm former school principal, as foreman. "We'll examine each murder charge individually," he told them, "based solely on the evidence, not just our emotions." They began with Sarah Chen's murder. Lily's testimony, coupled with physical and forensic evidence, formed an unbreakable chain linking Whitmore to the crime. Juror Maria Santos, a mother of 3, whispered, "That little girl was so brave." The way she described the scary man with his scar and watch, too specific to be imagined or coached. When the topic turned to admiration, was unanimous. Some jurors admitted initial skepticism about canine evidence. But the precision of his searches and the irrefutable items he uncovered erased any doubt. The German shepherd's work had proven not only reliable, but vital. One by one, they reviewed each charge, the pattern of stalking and killing becoming undeniable. Whitmore's own words, photographs, and hidden keepsakes made the verdict feel inevitable. "I never believed in police dogs before this trial," admitted Robert Chen, a retired engineer who had initially been skeptical about using animal behavior as evidence in a murder case. But Zeus's track record and the evidence he found, there's no way that was coincidence or contamination. That dog has abilities that humans just don't possess. And his discoveries were the key to exposing Whitmore's true nature. The horror that emerged from reviewing Whitmore's trophy collection and handwritten journal created moments of stunned silence as jurors confronted the reality that they were dealing with a serial killer whose predatory behavior had extended far beyond the 4 identified victims. The defendant's own words, preserved in his meticulous documentation of stalking and murder plans, eliminated any possibility that his crimes had been crimes of passion or momentary lapses in judgment. "Reading his journal was like looking into the mind of a monster," said Jennifer Walsh, a social worker whose professional experience with domestic violence had prepared her to understand predatory behavior patterns. The way he wrote about these women, like they were objects he owned, like their resistance to his control justified their murder. This wasn't domestic violence escalating into homicide. This was systematic predation by someone who believed his wealth gave him the right to destroy anyone who defied him. The jurors' determination to ensure justice for all victims extended beyond the specific charges they were considering to encompass the broader implications of their verdict for society's ability to protect vulnerable women from wealthy predators who used their resources to escape consequences for violent crimes. Their discussion included recognition that their decision would establish precedents for child witness testimony, canine evidence admissibility, and the principle that no amount of money should provide immunity from prosecution for murder. "We're not just deciding Marcus Whitmore's fate," observed David Kim, a college professor whose understanding of legal precedent helped his fellow jurors appreciate the broader significance of their decision. "We're establishing whether the justice system can hold wealthy predators accountable when they use their resources to terrorize and murder vulnerable women." This verdict will influence how similar cases that demonstrated Whitmore's calculated approach to selecting and eliminating victims who had dared to reject his suffocating control. The evidence connecting him to Jessica Martinez, Amanda Foster, and Rachel Williams was as comprehensive as the proof of Sarah Chen's murder, creating multiple counts of first-degree murder that demanded maximum punishment under the law. The jury's careful consideration of the death penalty charges reflected their recognition that Whitmore's crimes met the legal standards for capital punishment, while acknowledging the enormous responsibility involved in making life and death decisions. Their discussion balanced the heinous nature of his crimes against their personal feelings about state-sanctioned execution, ultimately focusing on the legal requirements rather than their individual philosophical positions. The evidence shows premeditation, multiple victims, and a pattern of behavior that makes him a continuing threat to society, Martinez summarized, as the jury moved toward their final vote. Under the law, these crimes qualify for the death penalty, and our personal feelings about capital punishment can't override our responsibility to apply the law as the judge instructed. The unanimity of the jury's decision
surprised no one who had observed their reactions to the evidence throughout the trial, as the overwhelming nature of the prosecution's case had eliminated any reasonable basis for doubt about Whitmore's guilt on all charges. Their return to the courtroom after less than 2 hours of deliberation sent a clear message about the strength of the evidence and their confidence in the verdict they were about to deliver. The packed courtroom resembled a cathedral of justice, as hundreds of spectators, media representatives, and court personnel waited in hushed anticipation for the jury's verdict that would determine Marcus Whitmore's fate and establish crucial legal precedents for protecting society's most vulnerable members from wealthy predators. The 3 weeks of testimony had transformed a local murder case into a national phenomenon that had sparked debates about child witnesses, police investigative methods, and the fundamental question of whether wealth could still provide immunity from consequences for violent crimes. Judge Harrison's entrance prompted the traditional call to order, but the courtroom's atmosphere remained charged with tension as everyone present understood they were about to witness a historic moment that would be remembered long after the specific details of the case had faded from public memory. The judge's instructions to maintain decorum during the verdict reading reflected his recognition that emotions would run high regardless of the jury's decision, while his visible security presence emphasized the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the trial's conclusion. The jury's return, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, had sent shockwaves through both legal teams, as the brief deliberation period suggested either complete agreement on acquittal or overwhelming consensus about guilt that left little room for debate. Victoria Kane's face had gone pale when she learned about the quick return, while Rebecca Stone had felt a surge of vindication that suggested her presentation of evidence had convinced the jury beyond any reasonable doubt. Harold Martinez, the jury foreman, stood with the solemnity appropriate for someone about to deliver verdicts that would affect multiple families, while establishing legal precedents that would influence criminal prosecutions for decades to come. His voice carried across the silent courtroom as he began reading the multiple charges that had been filed against Marcus Whitmore, each count representing a life that had been destroyed by predatory behavior disguised as romantic interest. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Dr. Sarah Chen, we find the defendant, Marcus James Whitmore, guilty, Martinez announced, his words creating visible reactions throughout the courtroom, as families of victims began to realize that justice would finally be served for crimes that had destroyed their lives and shattered their communities. The reading continued with guilty verdicts on all charges related to the murders of Jessica Martinez, Amanda Foster, and Rachel Williams, while additional convictions for stalking, breaking and entering, and violation of restraining orders created a comprehensive legal accountability that matched the scope of Whitmore's predatory behavior. Each guilty verdict represented validation for families who had spent years wondering what had happened to their missing daughters, sisters, and friends. Marcus Whitmore's reaction to his conviction demonstrated the complete collapse of the arrogant composure he had maintained throughout the trial, his face showing genuine shock that his wealth and social connections had failed to protect him from the consequences of systematic murder and terrorization. His whispered, "This can't be happening," was audible throughout the courtroom, reflecting his inability to accept that justice could overcome the privilege and influence he had relied upon throughout his adult life. The family's emotional responses to finally receiving justice after years of uncertainty and frustration created some of the most powerful moments in the courtroom's history. As parents, siblings, and children, who had been denied closure for years, finally experienced the validation that their loved ones' deaths would not go unpunished. Carmen Martinez collapsed in tears as she realized that Jessica's killer would face the maximum penalty allowed by law, while the Foster family embraced each other with relief, establishing new standards for police work and canine evidence that would influence law enforcement procedures across the country. The veteran detective's quiet satisfaction was matched by Zeus's calm presence beside her, the German shepherd somehow understanding that their partnership had achieved something significant that went beyond solving individual crimes. The most emotionally powerful moment of the verdict reading came when 4-year-old Lily Chen, who had been brought to the courtroom despite concerns about exposing her to additional trauma, whispered thank you to Zeus while burying her small face in the dog's fur. The image of a traumatized child finding comfort with the canine detective who had helped solve her mother's murder created a moment of pure human connection that transcended legal proceedings and spoke directly to fundamental concepts of justice, protection, and healing. Judge Harrison's sentencing remarks reflected his understanding of the case's broader significance, while acknowledging the extraordinary courage shown by witnesses whose testimony had overcome legal challenges and established new protections for society's most vulnerable members. His voice carried unusual emotion as he addressed the defendant whose crimes had tested the limits of the justice system's ability to hold wealthy predators accountable for their actions. Marcus Whitmore, you have been convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder, based on evidence so overwhelming that it eliminates any doubt about your guilt, Judge Harrison declared, his words carrying the weight of legal authority combined with moral outrage at the scope of the defendant's crimes. Your wealth and social standing allowed you to prey upon vulnerable women for years, but they cannot protect you from the consequences of your actions. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count of murder, sentences to run consecutively, ensuring that you will never again threaten innocent lives. The sight of Marcus Whitmore being led away in shackles represented the ultimate reversal of fortune for someone who had used wealth and influence to escape consequences for years. His orange jumpsuit and restraints creating a stark contrast to the expensive suits and confident demeanor he had displayed throughout his adult life. His stumbling walk toward the courthouse exit reflected the complete destruction of the arrogance and entitlement that had driven his predatory behavior. The courtroom's eruption in sustained applause violated traditional judicial decorum, but reflected the community's recognition that justice had been served in a case that had challenged fundamental assumptions about wealth, privilege, and accountability in the American legal system. The applause continued as families of victims, law enforcement officers, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case celebrated the victory of truth over money, courage over intimidation, and justice over privilege that would be remembered as a watershed moment in criminal law. 6 months after Marcus Whitmore's conviction, the transformation in 4-year-old Lily Chen was nothing short of miraculous, though Dr. Emma Torres was careful to explain to anyone who would listen that healing from such profound trauma was a gradual process that would continue for years to come. The little girl who had once been unable to speak or eat was now living with her Aunt Maria and Uncle Carlos in their warm Phoenix home, where the desert sunshine and patient love of extended family members had created the safe environment necessary for her psychological recovery to flourish. The weekly video therapy sessions with Dr. Torres had become a cherished routine that allowed Lily to maintain her connection with the therapist who had helped her find her voice during the darkest period of her young life. These sessions, conducted through secure connections that protected Lily's privacy while allowing Dr. Torres to monitor her progress, revealed steady improvement in the child's ability to process her trauma, while developing healthy coping mechanisms for the challenges that lay ahead. Lily's resilience continues to amaze me, Dr. Torres reported during a consultation with child trauma specialists who were studying the case to better understand recovery patterns in young witnesses who had testified in murder trials. She's not only processing her own trauma, but showing remarkable insight into how her courage helped protect other families from suffering the same loss she experienced. Maria Chen Santos had proven to be exactly the guardian that Lily needed during this crucial healing period. Combining the nurturing instincts of a loving aunt with the practical understanding of trauma recovery that came from her own work as a pediatric nurse. Her decision to relocate from Phoenix to a smaller city outside the media spotlight had provided Lily with the anonymity necessary for normal childhood development, while maintaining access to specialized therapeutic services. The gradual return to typical childhood activities had been carefully orchestrated by Dr. Torres and Maria, working together to ensure that each new experience was introduced at a pace that respected Lily's psychological readiness. Her enrollment in a preschool program that specialized in working with children who had experienced trauma marked a significant milestone, as did her participation in art classes where she could express herself creatively without the pressure of therapeutic goals or legal requirements. Lily's return to verbal communication had been one of the most encouraging aspects of her recovery, though Dr. Torres cautioned that progress was not always linear and that setbacks were normal parts of the healing process. The child's vocabulary had expanded dramatically as she felt safe enough to express her thoughts and feelings, while her ability to ask questions, death, and her own future demonstrated healthy psychological development, despite the trauma she had endured. The community's support for Lily's recovery had been overwhelming, with cards, gifts, and financial contributions arriving from across the country as people who had followed her story wanted to help ensure her future success and happiness. A trust fund established by anonymous donors had grown to over $500,000, providing resources for her education, ongoing therapy, and any special needs that might arise as she continued to heal and grow. Zeus's regular visits to Lily's new home had become one of the most important elements of her recovery process, as the special bond between the child witness and the canine detective who had helped solve her mother's murder provided comfort and closure that no human intervention could replicate. Detective Rodriguez made the drive from the city every few weeks, bringing Zeus for supervised visits that allowed Lily to express her gratitude while giving her opportunities to pet and play with the dog who had become a hero in her young mind. Zeus helped catch the bad man, Lily would explain to anyone who asked about her friendship with the German Shepherd, her words reflecting both her understanding of justice and her appreciation for the role that different individuals had played in ensuring her safety, and her mother's memory was honored through accountability for the crimes committed against their family. The most significant change in Lily's artwork had been the gradual shift from drawings dominated by red crayon and scary figures to colorful representations of happy memories with her mother, her new family, and her hopes for the future. Dr. Torres carefully preserved these artistic expressions of healing, understanding that they documented not only Lily's recovery, but also the potential for young trauma survivors to overcome experiences that might have destroyed their ability to trust and love. Recent drawings showed Lily and her mother baking cookies together, playing in the park, and reading bedtime stories. Memories that had been temporarily buried by trauma, but were now emerging as sources of comfort and connection to the love that had defined her early childhood. Other pictures showed her new family, including Zeus as a protective presence, and even some that depicted her as a grown-up, helping other children who were scared or sad. The breakthrough moment that brought tears to everyone who witnessed it came during a quiet afternoon when Lily was playing with her dolls while Maria prepared dinner in the kitchen. Without any prompting or special occasion, Lily suddenly looked up and smiled. Not the tentative, careful expressions that had marked her recovery period, but a genuine, spontaneous smile of childhood joy that illuminated her entire face and reminded everyone present of the resilient, loving child who had survived unimaginable trauma. "Look, Aunt Maria," Lily had called out,
holding up a drawing of a rainbow with a little girl underneath it. "I made something pretty. Do you think Mommy would like it?" Maria's tears of joy at seeing her niece's first genuine smile since her mother's murder marked a turning point in their shared healing journey, as both child and guardian began to believe that happiness was not only possible but inevitable for a little girl whose courage had helped ensure that other families would never suffer the same devastating loss that had shattered their world, but ultimately made them stronger together. The legal precedents established by the Marcus Whitmore case created shockwaves throughout the American criminal justice system that would influence prosecutorial strategies, defense tactics, and judicial procedures for decades to come, as courts across the country began implementing the innovative protections for child witnesses and enhanced protocols for canine evidence that had been developed during the landmark trial. Law schools from Harvard to Stanford added the case to their curricula as a perfect example of how the justice system could evolve to protect vulnerable witnesses while maintaining constitutional protections for defendants. The Lily Chen Child Witness Protection Act, signed into law by the governor just 8 months after Whitmore's conviction, established comprehensive guidelines for courts handling cases involving traumatized child witnesses, including mandatory closed-circuit television options, specialized training for attorneys questioning children, and requirements for mental health professionals to monitor proceedings for potential psychological harm. The legislation had been drafted with input from Dr. Emma Torres, victim advocate Jennifer Walsh, and legal experts who had observed the trial's innovative accommodations. This law ensures that no child will ever again be silenced by a legal system that prioritizes traditional procedures over the well-being of traumatized witnesses, explained State Senator Patricia Williams, who had sponsored the legislation after being moved by media coverage of Lily's courageous testimony. "We're establishing a new standard that recognizes children's rights to be heard, while protecting them from further victimization by the legal process itself." Enhanced protocols for canine evidence in criminal investigations had been adopted by law enforcement agencies across 15 states, with Zeus's remarkable discoveries serving as the gold standard for training programs that taught officers how to maximize the effectiveness of police-dog partnerships. The protocols included standardized training requirements, documentation procedures, and scientific validation methods that elevated canine evidence from a supplementary investigative tool to a primary forensic technique. Detective Rodriguez found herself in the unexpected role of national expert on canine evidence procedures, traveling to police academies and law enforcement conferences where she shared the techniques and insights that had made her partnership with Zeus so remarkably successful. Her presentations, always accompanied by Zeus himself, inspired other officers to develop similar relationships with their canine partners, while emphasizing the scientific rigor necessary to make dog-based evidence admissible in court. Zeus didn't just solve the Whitmore case, Rodriguez explained during a presentation to the National Association of Police Chiefs. He demonstrated that properly trained dogs can detect evidence that human investigators might miss, leading to breakthroughs in cases that might otherwise remain unsolved. But the key is treating canine evidence with the same scientific standards we apply to any other forensic technique. The impact on cold cases involving missing women had been extraordinary, as law enforcement agencies across the country began reviewing files with new understanding of how wealthy predators might operate across jurisdictional boundaries while using their resources to avoid detection. The Whitmore investigation had revealed patterns of behavior that helped investigators identify similar cases that had previously been treated as isolated incidents rather than parts of larger predatory schemes. More than 30 cold cases in 12 states had been reopened based on similarities to the Whitmore pattern, with several resulting in arrests of wealthy men whose previous victims had been dismissed as runaways or accident victims. The creation of a national database for tracking missing women who had been involved with financially successful men had already yielded connections that local investigators had missed when working in isolation. District Attorney Rebecca Stone's promotion to State Attorney General had been widely viewed as recognition for her groundbreaking prosecution of the Whitmore case, but her acceptance speech emphasized that the real victory belonged to witnesses like Lily Chen, who had found the courage to speak truth to power despite overwhelming obstacles. Her new position gave her a platform to advocate for victims' rights legislation and expanded resources for prosecuting domestic violence cases that might escalate to homicide. The Whitmore case taught us that domestic violence doesn't always end with separation, Stone explained during her swearing-in ceremony, and that wealthy abusers may be more dangerous than we previously understood because they have resources to plan and execute violence while covering their tracks. We need specialized prosecution units that understand these dynamics and can work across jurisdictions to protect vulnerable women. The creation of specialized domestic violence homicide units in major cities across the country reflected Stone's influence and the broader recognition that mental health professionals into teams that could address both the immediate legal challenges and the long-term support needs of survivors and their families. Police training programs for child witness interviews had been completely revamped based on the therapeutic techniques that Dr. Torres had developed for working with Lily, ensuring that officers understood how to gather information from traumatized children without causing additional psychological harm. The training emphasized patience, age-appropriate communication, and recognition of signs that a child was becoming overwhelmed by the interview process. The case had become a model for future prosecutions involving complex evidence, multiple victims, and challenges to traditional legal procedures. With the trial transcripts and evidence presentations being studied by legal professionals who wanted to understand how innovative approaches could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Law enforcement agencies reported increased success rates in cases involving child witnesses, while courts noted improved cooperation from young victims who felt protected by the new procedures. Judge Harrison's judicial decisions throughout the trial had been upheld by every appellate court that reviewed them, establishing precedents that balanced defendants' constitutional rights against the need to protect vulnerable witnesses from further trauma. His careful attention to legal procedure while innovating protective measures had created a template that other judges could follow when facing similar challenges in their own courtrooms. The ripple effects extended beyond the legal system into medical schools, social work programs, and child psychology training, where the case had become a standard example of how different professionals could work together to support trauma survivors while ensuring that justice was served. The interdisciplinary approach that had made Lily's testimony possible was now being taught as a model for handling similar cases across the country. The memorial service for Dr. Sarah Chen and the 3 other victims of Marcus Whitmore's predatory violence took place on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after his conviction, bringing together hundreds of family members, friends, law enforcement officers, and community members who had been touched by the case that had transformed their understanding of justice, courage, and the power of truth to overcome wealth and privilege. The interfaith ceremony, held in the city's largest cathedral, honored not only the lives that had been lost, but also the survivors whose strength had made accountability possible. The Dr. Sarah Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund, established by donations from across the country, had already provided full tuition assistance to 12 single mothers pursuing medical degrees, ensuring that Sarah's legacy of healing and demanding professional training. The scholarship recipients, who attended the memorial service as a group, represented diverse backgrounds, but shared Sarah's determination to serve others despite personal obstacles. Sarah believed that healing was both a profession and a calling, explained Dr. Patricia Wong, Sarah's former colleague, who had become the Scholarship Fund's director. And these remarkable women are carrying forward her commitment to providing medical care for children whose families might not otherwise have access to specialized treatment. Each scholarship recipient is not just receiving financial support, they're becoming part of Sarah's continuing mission to heal and protect vulnerable children. The families of Jessica Martinez, Amanda Foster, and Rachel Williams had found the closure and peace that had eluded them during years of uncertainty about their daughters' fates, with the memorial service providing an opportunity to celebrate lives that had been cut short by predatory violence, while honoring the courage of those who had ensured that their killings did not go unpunished. Their presence together demonstrated the bonds that had been forged through shared tragedy and the pursuit of justice. Carmen Martinez, Jessica's mother, had become a powerful advocate for families of missing persons, working with law enforcement agencies to improve communication and coordination when investigating disappearances that might be connected to domestic violence. Her transformation from grieving parent to activist demonstrated how tragedy could be channeled into positive change that protected other families from similar suffering. The most emotionally powerful moment of the memorial service came when 5-year-old Lily Chen, now healthy and thriving in her new home, placed flowers on her mother's grave and spoke words that brought tears to everyone present, while demonstrating the remarkable healing that had occurred in the years since her traumatic testimony had helped convict her mother's killer. "Mommy would be proud that we helped catch the bad man," Lily said, her clear voice carrying across the cemetery as she stood beside the headstone that honored Dr. Sarah Chen's life and service. And she would be happy that Zeus and Detective Rodriguez are still helping other people who are scared and sad like we were. Detective Rodriguez and Zeus
who had attended the memorial service in recognition of their crucial role in solving the case, continued their partnership on new investigations that benefited from the enhanced protocols and national recognition that had resulted from their groundbreaking work. Their recent successes included solving 2 additional cold cases involving missing women, while their training of other canine teams had multiplied their impact across multiple jurisdictions. The ongoing impact of their work extended beyond individual cases to fundamental changes in how law enforcement wealthy suspects who might use their resources to avoid detection or prosecution. Police departments across the country had implemented training programs based on the Whitmore investigation, while federal agencies had begun coordinating efforts to identify predators who operated across state lines. The community's commitment to preventing future tragedies had manifested in numerous ways, from increased funding for domestic violence shelters to enhanced training for judges handling restraining order requests from women seeking protection from wealthy or influential abusers. The case had raised awareness about how economic inequality could affect access to justice, leading to policy changes designed to level the playing field for vulnerable victims. Local schools had implemented new programs teaching children about personal safety and the importance of reporting threatening behavior, while community organizations had created support networks for single mothers who might be vulnerable to predatory men seeking to exploit their financial or emotional needs. The comprehensive approach to prevention reflected understanding that protecting potential victims required addressing systemic issues that created vulnerability. The promise that Sarah Chen's death was not in vain had been fulfilled through the fundamental changes in how the justice system approached cases involving child witnesses, domestic violence, and wealthy defendants who believed their resources could provide immunity from consequences. Her murder had sparked reforms that would protect countless other families from suffering similar tragedies, while her daughter's courage had demonstrated that truth could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to avoid accountability. As the memorial service concluded and attendees dispersed to continue their lives and work, the consensus was clear that the legacy of Dr. Sarah Chen and the other victims would endure through the legal precedents, investigative techniques, and support systems that had emerged from the pursuit of justice in their names. The case had proven that no amount of wealth or influence could ultimately protect predators from the consequences of their actions. When communities, law enforcement, and the legal system worked together to ensure that all victims were heard, believed, and avenged. The final image of the memorial service, Lily Chen walking hand in hand with Detective Rodriguez, while Zeus trotted beside them toward a future where other children would be protected by the changes their courage had made possible, served as a powerful reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, would ultimately prevail when good people refused to allow wealth and privilege to silence the voices of those who had suffered and survived. The bond between Detective Rodriguez and Zeus reminds us of something profound: the extraordinary loyalty and intelligence that German Shepherds bring into our lives. Their unwavering dedication, sharp instincts, and deep emotional connection with their human partners create relationships that transcend the ordinary. Zeus didn't just solve crimes. He demonstrated the remarkable capacity these dogs have to understand, protect, and heal alongside us. In our own homes, these gentle giants offer that same devotion. They read our emotions, stand by us through difficult times, and remind us daily what unconditional love looks like. Every German Shepherd has the potential to be a hero in their own family's story. If you've been blessed with one of these remarkable companions, you might find it meaningful to explore ways to deepen that special connection you already share. There's something beautiful about understanding your dog's unique language
and strengthening the bond that makes your relationship so precious. Sometimes the smallest insights can transform an already wonderful partnership into something truly extraordinary, just like Zeus and Detective Rodriguez showed us all.